On a seemingly ordinary flight, a single moment of injustice set off a chain of events that no one on board could have predicted. A black woman, calm yet unwavering, found herself at the center of a quiet storm. A storm that would lead to a confrontation with the airline's highest authority. What unfolded next left an entire cabin stunned and sent shockwaves through the very foundation of the company. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to Adam Alpha for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now, let's get into it. The early morning sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of the busy airport terminal, painting the polished floors with streaks of gold. Aisha Harris walked briskly toward Gate 14, her leather carry-on slung over one shoulder, a cup of coffee in her hand. She had arrived early, as she always did, appreciating the calmness of the airport before the day's chaos unfolded. Her sharp blazer and tailored slacks, paired with a silk scarf, spoke of a woman who valued both professionalism and elegance. Yet, despite her polished appearance, she couldn't help but notice the sideways glances she received as she passed through the terminal. Aisha was used to this, the subtle second looks, the brief flickers of confusion or judgment. Sometimes it was the way people hesitated before answering her questions, other times the way they instinctively clutched their belongings tighter as she walked by. She had long mastered the art of ignoring such things, but there were moments when the sting of it lingered. Can you guess what happened next on this flight that changed everything? Keep watching to find out. Aisha refused to let anything ruin her mood today. She had an important business meeting overseas, and her presentation was polished to perfection. The flight promised a few hours of peaceful preparation time, and she was determined to make the most of it. As she approached the gate, she was met with the usual cacophony of announcements, boarding calls, and the hum of conversation. The line for first-class passengers was shorter than the others, as expected, and she joined it without hesitation. Ahead of her stood a man in a sleek suit with a designer briefcase and a middle-aged woman holding a luxury handbag. Behind her, an elderly couple murmured to each other in hushed tones, their matching windbreakers betraying their plans for leisure travel. When Aisha reached the front of the line, she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, a young man with an overly rehearsed smile. "Good morning, ma'am," he greeted her, scanning the pass. For a split second, his smile faltered, his eyes darting down to the ticket again as if to double-check what he'd just seen. He quickly recovered, handing the pass back to her with a slightly forced politeness. "Enjoy your flight." Aisha offered him a small smile and proceeded down the jet bridge, her heels clicking softly against the metal floor. The smell of airplane air, faintly metallic, a little too cold, hit her as she stepped aboard. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," said the flight attendant stationed at the door. Her tone was courteous, but her eyes flicked down to Aisha's carry-on bag with faint disapproval. Aisha felt the weight of the glance but didn't let it deter her. She gave a polite nod and walked toward her seat. Her seat was 3A, a window seat in the first-class cabin. As she placed her bag in the overhead compartment, Aisha felt a faint prickle of unease. 2 rows ahead, a woman in her mid-30s, dressed crisply in the airline uniform, was speaking with another flight attendant. Aisha caught snippets of the conversation, something about pre-departure drinks, but it wasn't their words that caught her attention. It was the way the woman glanced in her direction. It was fleeting, but the look carried a faint air of skepticism. What do you think this flight attendant did that sparked a firestorm? Stay tuned, because this story is about to take a shocking turn. Aisha took her seat, sliding her carry-on under the seat in front of her and carefully draping her scarf over the armrest. She glanced out the window, watching the ground crew scurry about their tasks. The minutes passed, and the cabin filled with the low hum of boarding passengers. A man in a business suit took the seat across from her, already engrossed in his tablet. A young woman in a bright sundress seated herself diagonally behind Aisha, fidgeting with her phone. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering pre-departure beverages to the first-class passengers. Aisha watched as they poured glasses of champagne, placed them delicately on napkins, and smiled warmly at the recipients. She waited patiently, knowing they would come to her soon. But they didn't. Minutes passed, and Aisha realized that while every other passenger had been attended to, no one had approached her row. She glanced down the aisle, catching sight of the same woman from earlier, the one whose name tag read Lisa Cooper. Lisa seemed to be deliberately avoiding contact with Aisha as she moved from one passenger to the next. Aisha decided to give it the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps it was an oversight. She pressed the call button, a soft chime cutting through the cabin's quiet chatter. A moment later, Lisa appeared, her expression stiff and professional. "Yes, ma'am," she asked, her tone clipped. "Good morning," Aisha said, keeping her voice calm and even. "Could I trouble you for some water?" Lisa's eyes flicked to the untouched champagne glasses on the other passengers' trays before returning to Aisha. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll be serving drinks shortly," she said curtly. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away. Aisha blinked, her composure momentarily shaken. The response had been unnecessarily dismissive, but she chose to let it go. She leaned back in her seat and took a deep breath. Perhaps Lisa was simply having a bad day. The flight's departure was delayed slightly due to weather conditions, and the captain's voice came over the intercom to provide an update. As Aisha waited, she noticed Lisa lingering near the galley with another flight attendant, a tall man whose name tag read Jeff Wallace. They were speaking in hushed tones, but their occasional glances toward her spoke volumes. Aisha pretended not to notice. She opened her laptop and began reviewing her presentation, determined to focus on her work. Yet the uncomfortable feeling lingered. It wasn't the first time she had been treated with suspicion or condescension, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But there was something about Lisa's behavior that felt particularly pointed, as if it wasn't just about Aisha's request for water. It was about her presence in first class, her very existence in a space where Lisa didn't think she belonged. For now, Aisha resolved to stay patient. But patience, she knew, had its limits. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign turning off reverberated through the cabin, signaling that the plane had reached cruising altitude. Aisha closed her laptop gently, deciding to take a break from her work. Outside the window, clouds rolled by like a vast white sea, serene and undisturbed. But the serenity outside was a stark contrast to the undercurrent of tension she felt within the cabin. She glanced around the first-class section. The man across the aisle was sipping his champagne, engrossed in a financial report on his tablet. The woman behind her adjusted her headphones, clearly settling in for a nap. It was a world of quiet luxury, where every need was supposed to be anticipated and fulfilled. Yet Aisha felt like an intruder in this carefully curated space. Lisa's voice drifted through the cabin as she conversed with another passenger near the front, her tone warm and professional, a stark contrast to the clipped response she had given Aisha earlier. Aisha couldn't help but wonder, was it me? Did I do something wrong? But deep down, she knew the answer. She had done nothing wrong. As the service cart approached, Lisa and Jeff worked their way through the aisles. Lisa handed out lunch menus with a bright, rehearsed smile, pausing briefly at each row to exchange pleasantries. When she reached Aisha, however, the smile vanished like a shadow retreating from the light. "Here's the menu," Lisa said, her tone neutral, her eyes avoiding Aisha's. She placed the menu on Aisha's tray table with a noticeable lack of care, the edge of it brushing against Aisha's hand. No apology followed. Lisa moved on without waiting to see if Aisha needed anything else. Aisha picked up the menu, scanning it without much interest. She wasn't particularly hungry, but the gesture was hard to ignore. She looked up just in time to see Lisa lingering at the next row, laughing at a joke made by the man in the suit across the aisle. Her demeanor was light and pleasant, a stark contrast to the coldness she had shown Aisha moments ago. The lunch orders were taken row by row. When Lisa returned to Aisha, her pen poised over her notepad, there was a slight hesitance in her stance, as if she were bracing herself. "What would you like, ma'am?" she asked, her voice devoid of warmth. Aisha met her gaze, keeping her tone calm. "I'll have the grilled salmon, please." Lisa jotted it down quickly and turned away without acknowledgement. The interaction was so perfunctory it felt transactional, devoid of the courtesy Aisha had seen extended to other passengers. The man across the aisle received a jovial "excellent choice, sir," when he ordered the same dish. Aisha felt the imbalance like a weight pressing against her chest. It wasn't the words, it was the tone, the lack of care, the subtle yet deliberate way Lisa made her feel unwelcome. These weren't overt acts of discrimination, the kind that made headlines or went viral. This was quieter, insidious, 1,000 small cuts that didn't bleed but left their mark all the same. When the meal service began, Aisha sat quietly as Lisa placed her tray on the table with mechanical precision, not even glancing her way. The utensils were slightly misaligned, the napkin haphazardly tucked to one side. It was a small detail, but after everything else, it felt intentional. Lisa moved on, her laughter bubbling up again as she chatted with the man 2 rows ahead. Aisha inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. She wasn't the type to seek confrontation, but there were limits. She decided she couldn't let this continue. She pressed the call button. Lisa arrived moments later, her expression betraying a flicker of irritation. "Yes," she asked, standing stiffly, her hands clasped in front of her. Aisha kept her tone measured. "Is there a reason I'm being treated differently from the other passengers?" Lisa blinked, her professional mask slipping slightly. "Excuse me?" "I've been watching how you've interacted with everyone else in this cabin," Aisha said, her voice calm but unwavering. "The warmth, the smiles, the care. I'm just curious why that hasn't extended to me." Lisa's eyes darted around the cabin, clearly aware that other passengers could overhear. "I assure you, ma'am, I'm treating everyone the same." Aisha's gaze was steady, unyielding. "I don't think you are." For a moment, the tension was palpable. Lisa straightened her posture, her tone growing defensive. "I don't know what you're implying, but I'm just doing my job." "Then I suggest you do it better," Aisha said evenly, her voice unwavering, "because this doesn't feel like professionalism. It feels personal." Lisa's jaw tightened. She glanced around again, as if seeking backup, and sure enough, Jeff appeared a moment later. He loomed beside her, his presence more intimidating than reassuring. "Is there a problem here?" Jeff asked, his voice calm but with an edge of authority. "No problem," Aisha said, sitting back in her seat. "I was just pointing out the inconsistencies in your service. But it seems you're more interested in dismissing my concerns than addressing them." Jeff's expression hardened. "Ma'am, if you're unhappy with our service, you're welcome to file a complaint after the flight." Aisha's lips pressed into a thin line. She had dealt with men like Jeff before, men who believed their authority was absolute, who thought their word ended every discussion. But Aisha had learned long ago that silence in the face of injustice was complicity. "I think I'll do that," she said, her voice steady. "But in the meantime, I expect to be treated with the same respect as everyone else on this plane." Lisa and Jeff exchanged a glance before retreating down the aisle. Aisha watched them go, her pulse steady but her resolve stronger than ever. She knew this wasn't over. And neither was she. The hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, steady and unrelenting, a backdrop to the simmering tension in Aisha's row. She took a sip of water from the small plastic cup on her tray, her fingers steady despite the quiet storm brewing inside her. The interaction with Lisa and Jeff replayed in her mind, not in a loop of regret, but as a sharpening focus on what had just unfolded. They had tried to dismiss her, to minimize her presence, but she had stood her ground. "Good," she thought. "They need to know I won't be overlooked." Across the aisle, a passenger, a man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair, glanced over at Aisha with a look of curiosity. He had overheard the brief exchange and offered a subtle nod of support when their eyes met. It was small, but it meant something. Aisha returned a faint smile before turning her attention back to the window. Clouds stretched endlessly beneath the plane, a vast blanket that seemed both close and untouchable. Aisha often found comfort in this view. It reminded her of possibilities, of the vastness of the world beyond petty prejudices and small minds. But today, the clouds felt distant, like a peace she couldn't quite reach. The cabin crew resumed their duties, though Aisha noticed Lisa and Jeff were steering clear of her row. Another flight attendant, younger and seemingly less involved in the earlier incident, approached to clear her tray. The young woman's hands trembled slightly as she reached for Aisha's plate, and her eyes flickered with something that looked like guilt. "I hope everything was to your liking," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Aisha looked up, studying her face. There was no malice there, only unease. "Thank you," Aisha said, her tone kind but firm. "The food was fine." The attendant nodded quickly and hurried away, leaving Aisha to wonder how much of the tension the rest of the crew had absorbed. It was clear that the dynamics of the first-class cabin had shifted. Passengers were quieter, their conversations muted, as if everyone was waiting for the next moment to unfold. Aisha decided she wouldn't wait for them to come to her. She leaned forward, retrieving her phone from her bag, and opened her contacts, scrolling quickly. She found the name she needed, Samuel Harris. Her husband wasn't just her biggest supporter, he was also one of the airline's senior board members, a man whose influence carried weight where it mattered most. But Aisha wasn't calling for him to fix things. No, this wasn't about using her connections to demand retribution. This was about accountability. The call connected after 2 rings. "Hey, sweetheart," Samuel's warm voice greeted her. "How's the flight?" Aisha smiled faintly at the sound of him. "It's interesting," she said, keeping her tone light for now. "I'm calling because I need a little help." Samuel's tone shifted immediately, becoming more focused. "What happened?" Aisha gave him a concise account of the events so far, the dismissive behavior, the refusal to address her concerns, the unspoken but undeniable racism that laced each interaction. She spoke calmly, without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice was measured but edged with quiet anger. "I'll handle it." "No," Aisha interjected firmly. "I don't want you to handle it for me. I just need you to do one thing." "What's that?" he asked. "Get in touch with Raymond Carter," she said. "I think he'll want to know about this." The name alone carried weight. Raymond Carter, the CEO of the airline, was known for his hands-on approach and his insistence on maintaining the company's reputation for excellence. He wasn't a man who tolerated incompetence or discrimination. Samuel understood immediately. "I'll give him a call." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Aisha assured him. "I just want this addressed the right way." "Understood," Samuel said. "I'll handle it from here. You just focus on relaxing, okay?" Aisha smiled faintly, her heart lifting just slightly. "Thanks, Sam." They ended the call, and Aisha leaned back in her seat. She felt a sense of calm settle over her, not because the situation was resolved, but because she had taken control of it. She wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. She was making sure the right people knew what had happened. Several rows behind her, unbeknownst to Aisha, a man sat quietly, observing the entire cabin. His seat in economy class was unremarkable, and he blended in with the other passengers with ease. Dressed in a casual blazer and jeans, he looked like any other traveler. But this was no ordinary passenger. Raymond Carter was on this flight. The CEO often traveled incognito, choosing random flights to observe his company's operations without the filter of prearranged visits or rehearsed performances. He believed it gave him a clearer picture of what his employees were truly like when they thought no one important was watching. And today, he had witnessed everything. Raymond had noticed Aisha the moment she boarded. Her poise and confidence had stood out, as had the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. He had seen Lisa's cold glances, Jeff's dismissive stance, and the way other passengers had picked up on the tension. Raymond was a man who thrived on details, and the details he had seen today painted a troubling picture. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyebrows lifting slightly when he saw Samuel Harris's name on the screen. The two men had worked together closely on several projects, and Raymond respected Samuel's integrity deeply. "Raymond," Samuel's voice came through the line, "we need to talk." Raymond listened as Samuel recounted Aisha's experience, his expression darkening with each word. By the time the call ended, Raymond's mind was made up. He had seen enough. It was time to step in. The cabin was settling into a deceptive calm as the flight attendants wrapped up their lunch service. Aisha leaned back in her seat, her thoughts racing despite the serene facade she presented. Her call with Samuel had strengthened her resolve, but it also left her waiting for the next move, waiting for the situation to unfold in the way she knew it inevitably would. Lisa and Jeff were avoiding her row now, their movements carefully calculated to stay within their safe zones, the rows where they were welcomed, praised, and untouched by conflict. Yet Aisha could still feel their presence, a palpable weight in the air, as if the tension between them lingered like an invisible thread stretched taut. From the corner of her eye, Aisha noticed Lisa near the galley, leaning against the counter, speaking in hushed tones with Jeff. Their body language betrayed them, furtive glances toward Aisha's seat, quick, nervous gestures. Lisa's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, while Jeff stood with his hands on his hips, nodding grimly at whatever Lisa was saying. The murmur of their conversation was drowned out by the low hum of the engines, but Aisha didn't need to hear the words to know the tone. She had seen this play out before, the whispering, the defensive posturing, the justifications being built brick by brick. It was the architecture of denial. Meanwhile, in economy class, Raymond Carter sat quietly in his aisle seat, his demeanor unassuming yet his sharp eyes missing nothing. He watched Lisa and Jeff, his focus narrowed on their behavior. He had already observed enough to feel a knot of disappointment tightening in his chest. This wasn't just poor service, it was targeted, deliberate, and deeply unprofessional. Raymond had spent years building his airline into a brand synonymous with excellence. His success wasn't just measured in profit margins but in the trust of his passengers, the reputation he had cultivated through consistency and care. And now, he was watching two of his employees dismantle the trust in real time. He tapped his fingers lightly on the armrest, his mind methodically planning his next steps. He wasn't one for public confrontations, but this situation demanded immediate action. He could feel the eyes of the passengers around him, the subtle shifts in their posture as they picked up on the tension emanating from first class. Aisha's gaze flickered toward the aisle as Lisa finally emerged from the galley, her movements brisk and purposeful. The flight attendant carried herself with a veneer of confidence that Aisha could see right through. Lisa stopped at the row directly in front of Aisha's, smiling warmly at the passengers as she checked on their needs. It was an act, Aisha realized. Lisa was performing for the rest of the cabin, crafting an image of herself as the attentive professional. But the cracks in her facade were evident, her movements were a fraction too stiff, her smiles a fraction too forced. Lisa was rattled. Aisha decided she wasn't going to make it easy for her. When Lisa finally approached her row, Aisha straightened slightly in her seat, her expression calm but unyielding. Lisa hesitated for the briefest of moments before speaking. "Is there anything else you need, ma'am?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. Aisha met her gaze, her voice soft but pointed. "I've needed a lot of things on this flight, Lisa. Respect is one of them." The words hung in the air, sharp and unrelenting. Aisha didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The weight of her statement did all the work. Lisa blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She quickly recovered, her professional mask slipping back into place. "I assure you, ma'am, I've done my best to provide the same level of service to all passengers." Aisha tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Then perhaps your best needs improvement." There was a faint ripple of movement in the cabin as nearby passengers shifted in their seats, subtly tuning into the exchange. Lisa's cheeks flushed slightly, her composure cracking under the weight of the scrutiny. "Of course," Lisa said stiffly, her voice clipped. "If there's anything specific you'd like, I'll be happy to assist." Aisha didn't reply immediately. She let the silence stretch, let Lisa sit in the discomfort of it. Then, with deliberate calm, she said, "I'd like you to think about how you've treated me, not just now, but since I boarded this plane. And then I'd like you to ask yourself if that's the kind of person you want to be." The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the first-class cabin. Lisa's eyes flickered briefly, her jaw tightening as she struggled to maintain her composure. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her posture rigid, her steps hurried. Aisha exhaled slowly, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. She wasn't looking for an apology anymore, she had moved past that. This was about something bigger, something that Lisa and Jeff likely couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just about Aisha's dignity, it was about the principle. It was about accountability. Back in economy, Raymond Carter leaned back in his seat, his arms folded across his chest. He had watched the entire exchange, his respect for Aisha growing with each moment. She hadn't shouted or demanded or caused a scene. She had held her ground with grace and strength, forcing Lisa to confront her own actions without ever raising her voice. Raymond glanced at his watch. It was time. The call button above his seat illuminated with a soft chime. Moments later, a flight attendant appeared, her expression polite but curious. "How can I assist you, sir?" she asked. Raymond smiled faintly, his tone even. "Please inform the cabin crew that I'd like to speak with the senior flight attendant immediately." The woman blinked, surprised, but quickly nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll let them know right away." As she hurried off toward the front of the plane, Raymond adjusted his seatbelt and prepared himself. The time for observation was over. It was time to take action. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted into something unspoken but palpable. Passengers exchanged subtle glances, their curiosity piqued by the undercurrent of tension that no one could quite ignore. Aisha remained in her seat, her posture upright but relaxed, exuding a quiet authority. The confrontation with Lisa had not left her rattled, instead, it had sharpened her focus. She could feel the eyes of others on her, some sympathetic, others merely curious. She ignored them all. Her gaze returned to the window, the endless expanse of clouds below offering a momentary reprieve from the cabin's charged energy. But the reprieve was brief. Her thoughts, like the faint hum of the engines, were steady and relentless. She wondered what Lisa and Jeff were discussing now, what excuses they might be formulating to defend themselves against what they likely saw as minor inconveniences. But this isn't minor, Aisha thought. It never is. Near the galley, Lisa and Jeff huddled together again, their voices barely audible over the ambient noise of the plane. Lisa's composure was fraying at the edges, her hands fluttering as she spoke. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "I've been nothing but professional." Jeff frowned, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "You've been professional enough," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "But maybe just back off for the rest of the flight." Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. "She's being overly sensitive." "I didn't do anything wrong." Jeff didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted toward the first-class cabin, where Aisha sat with an almost regal stillness. It was that stillness that unnerved him, that unflinching calm that suggested she wasn't someone to underestimate. "You should let it go," he said finally. "The last thing we need is more attention on this." Lisa opened her mouth to argue but stopped when she saw the junior flight attendant approaching. The younger woman's expression was a mix of hesitation and urgency, her hands clutching a notepad tightly to her chest. "What is it?" Jeff asked, his tone brusque. "The passenger in 23C, she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He's requesting to speak with the senior flight attendant immediately." Lisa's brow furrowed. 23C? Who is that? The junior attendant glanced nervously toward the economy section. I think he's someone important." He said his name is Raymond Carter. The words landed like a thunderclap. Lisa and Jeff exchanged a stunned look, the color draining from Lisa's face. "Raymond Carter?" Lisa repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Jeff's jaw tightened. "The CEO." In first class, Aisha noticed the change immediately. The murmurs from the galley had stopped, replaced by an almost eerie silence. Lisa emerged moments later, her expression carefully neutral but her movements betraying her unease. She made her way toward economy class, her steps quicker than usual, her polished demeanor visibly strained. Aisha's gaze followed her, a flicker of curiosity sparking within. She wasn't sure what had prompted Lisa's sudden departure, but the shift in energy was undeniable. Something was happening. Lisa reached 23C, her heart pounding in her chest. Raymond Carter sat there, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter," Lisa said, her voice wavering slightly. "I wasn't aware you were on this flight." Raymond's lips curved into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's the point, isn't it?" he said lightly. I like to observe without the filters that usually accompany my position. Lisa swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. How can I assist you, sir? Raymond leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. You can start by explaining what's been happening in the first-class cabin. Lisa blinked, caught off guard. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. Raymond tilted his head, studying her. You're not sure? His tone was calm, almost conversational, but there was an edge to it that made Lisa's pulse quicken. Then allow me to clarify. I've been watching, Miss Cooper, from the moment passengers boarded. I've observed your interactions, your tone, your body language. And I've noticed a stark difference in the way you've treated one particular passenger. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but Raymond held up a hand, silencing her. I'm not interested in excuses, he said. What I want to know is why a first-class passenger, someone who paid for a premium experience, has been met with condescension and hostility instead of respect. In first class, Aisha remained unaware of the unfolding confrontation in the economy section. She noticed, however, that Jeff had begun pacing the aisle, his agitation barely concealed. His usual air of authority had been replaced by something closer to unease, and Aisha couldn't help but wonder what had shaken him. The answer came a few minutes later when Lisa returned, her face pale, her movements stiff. She walked directly to Jeff, leaning in close to whisper something. Whatever she said caused Jeff's eyes to widen slightly before his expression hardened. We need to fix this, Lisa murmured. Now. Jeff nodded reluctantly, and together they made their way toward Aisha's row. When Lisa and Jeff arrived, Aisha turned her attention to them, her expression calm but expectant. She could see the strain in their faces, the forced politeness in their postures. Miss Harris, Jeff began, his voice measured. We wanted to personally apologize if we've given you the impression that I don't need an impression, Aisha interrupted, her tone cool. What I've experienced has been very clear. Lisa flinched slightly but recovered quickly. We deeply regret if there's been any misunderstanding, she said, her voice wavering slightly. It was never our intention to make you feel disrespected. Aisha finished for her, her gaze steady. Disrespected? Is that the word you're looking for? Lisa nodded awkwardly, her professional mask slipping. Yes. We sincerely apologize. Before Aisha could respond, a new voice entered the conversation, smooth and authoritative. Apologies are meaningless without accountability. All three turned to see Raymond Carter standing at the edge of the first-class cabin. His presence was like a sudden shift in gravity, drawing the attention of every nearby passenger. Mr. Carter, Jeff stammered, stepping forward. We were just enough, Raymond said, cutting him off with a wave of his hand. His gaze shifted to Aisha, and his expression softened slightly. Miss Harris, may I have a moment of your time? Aisha nodded, her curiosity piqued but her composure intact. Of course. Raymond gestured toward the galley. Let's talk privately. As Aisha stood, the eyes of the cabin followed her. The quiet storm she had carried within her now swirled in the open, and everyone knew that something big was about to happen. The narrow galley of the plane was a world away from the comfort of the first-class cabin. Its tight space and muted hum seemed almost suffocating as Aisha followed Raymond Carter. She observed the way he carried himself, calm, deliberate, but with an unmistakable air of authority. He didn't need to assert it, his presence did that for him. Once they reached the galley, Raymond gestured toward a small jump seat. Aisha hesitated for a moment, then sat down, folding her hands neatly in her lap. He remained standing, his sharp eyes scanning her face with a mixture of curiosity and quiet respect. Miss Harris, he began, his voice low and measured, let me first say that I owe you a personal apology. Aisha tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. For what, exactly? For the treatment you've received on this flight, he said without hesitation. I've been watching from the moment you boarded. What I witnessed was unprofessional, disrespectful, and unacceptable. His words were direct, but Aisha didn't immediately reply. She allowed the weight of his apology to settle in the air between them. It was rare for someone in his position to take responsibility so openly, and she wanted to measure his sincerity. I appreciate your acknowledgement, she said finally, her voice calm but firm. But an apology doesn't erase what happened. Raymond nodded, his expression serious. You're absolutely right. Words alone mean nothing without action. And I intend to ensure that action is taken. The faint murmur of voices interrupted them from the galley doorway. Aisha caught sight of Lisa and Jeff hovering nearby, their body language a mix of tension and unease. Lisa's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, while Jeff's jaw was set, his eyes darting between Aisha and Raymond. Raymond turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on the pair. He didn't beckon them forward, but neither did he dismiss them. Instead, he addressed Aisha again. Before I say anything further, I'd like to hear directly from you, he said. Tell me, in your own words, what you've experienced on this flight. Aisha's brows lifted slightly, caught off guard by his willingness to listen. She took a moment to collect her thoughts before speaking. It started the moment I boarded, she began, her voice steady. The looks, the tone, the body language, it was clear that I wasn't being treated like the other first-class passengers. At first, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I assumed it might be an oversight, or perhaps they were having a bad day. She paused, her gaze flickering briefly to Lisa and Jeff. Lisa shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny, but Aisha continued without addressing her directly. But it wasn't an oversight. Every interaction felt calculated, whether it was the dismissive responses to my requests or the lack of care in their service. And when I finally spoke up, I was met with defensiveness instead of accountability. Raymond listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he let the silence stretch for a moment before nodding. Thank you for sharing that, he said. Your composure in the face of such treatment is admirable, and your account only confirms what I've observed. He turned his attention to Lisa and Jeff, his expression hardening. Now, I'd like to hear from you too. Explain your behavior. Lisa's cheeks flushed, and she hesitated before speaking. Mr. Carter, I don't think this is as serious as it's being made out to be. I was simply following standard procedures, and... Raymond raised a hand, silencing her. This isn't about procedures. This is about professionalism and respect. Were either of those present in your interactions with Miss Harris? Lisa faltered, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Jeff stepped in, his voice firm but cautious. We never intended to be disrespectful, he said. If Miss Harris felt that way, then we apologize. Raymond's eyes narrowed. You apologize if she felt disrespected? His tone was cold now, laced with quiet authority. That's not an apology. That's a deflection. Take accountability for your actions. Aisha watched the exchange silently, her expression calm but resolute. She wasn't here to punish them, but she wouldn't allow their behavior to be swept under the rug either. These moments of confrontation, uncomfortable as they were, mattered. They were necessary. Raymond's voice cut through her thoughts. This airline prides itself on treating every passenger with dignity and respect. What you've shown today is a failure not just of character, but of the standards we uphold as a company. Lisa's face was pale now, her composure unraveling. I didn't mean to, but you did, Raymond interrupted, his tone firm. And intentions mean nothing when the impact is harm. Do you understand that? Lisa nodded weakly, her eyes downcast. Jeff remained silent, his expression tense. Raymond turned back to Aisha. Miss Harris, as CEO of this airline, I want to personally assure you that this will be addressed. I'll be initiating a thorough review of our training programs to ensure that this kind of behavior is not only unacceptable but also preventable. He paused, his gaze steady. As for these two, they will no longer represent this company, effective immediately. The declaration landed heavily, the weight of it silencing even the faint hum of distant murmurs. Lisa's eyes widened, and she took a step forward. Mr. Carter, please, you had multiple chances to correct your behavior, Raymond said sharply, cutting her off. Instead, you doubled down. This is the consequence. Aisha exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She hadn't expected this level of accountability, but she appreciated it. She stood, meeting Raymond's gaze with a small nod. "Thank you," she said simply, "not just for listening, but for taking action." Raymond inclined his head. "Thank you for your patience and grace. I'm sorry it was ever required." As Aisha returned to her seat, the atmosphere in the cabin felt lighter, though the weight of what had transpired still lingered. Passengers watched her with a mix of respect and curiosity, but she ignored their stares. Her focus was on the clouds outside, now seeming closer, brighter, and more peaceful. Justice, after all, wasn't just about consequences, it was about change. And today, she had witnessed both. Aisha returned to her seat in first class, the cabin now hushed as if every passenger was collectively holding their breath. She eased into her chair, her posture as composed as ever, though the weight of the experience still lingered in her chest. The view outside her window, an endless expanse of clouds lit softly by the sun, offered a small comfort, but the quiet within her wasn't born from peace. It was the quiet of reflection, of processing all that had unfolded. She glanced around the cabin. Some passengers avoided her gaze, pretending to be absorbed in their books or screens, while others offered brief, supportive nods. A man across the aisle, the same one who had nodded earlier, gave her a subtle thumbs up. Aisha returned a faint, polite smile but didn't engage further. She wasn't looking for validation. She was simply letting the moment settle. The flight attendants continued their duties with an air of caution, moving through the cabin like they were stepping on glass. The younger flight attendant who had cleared Aisha's tray earlier approached hesitantly, her face pink with nervousness. "Miss Harris," she said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, "is there anything I can get you? A drink, perhaps, or a dessert? Anything you'd like." Aisha studied her for a moment. The girl was clearly trying to make amends, though Aisha suspected it was more out of fear than genuine empathy. Still, she appreciated the effort. "Thank you," Aisha said evenly. "I'll have a cup of tea." The attendant nodded quickly, almost stumbling in her eagerness to comply. She disappeared into the galley, leaving Aisha to her thoughts. The minutes ticked by, and slowly, the tension in the cabin began to ease. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, the passengers carefully tiptoeing back into normalcy. Aisha, however, remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the clouds outside. She wasn't angry anymore, not in the way she had been earlier. What she felt now was something more complex, a mix of exhaustion and triumph. She had stood her ground, demanded respect, and witnessed accountability. But the journey had taken its toll. The sound of soft footsteps broke her reverie. She turned to see Raymond Carter standing beside her row, his expression composed but thoughtful. "Miss Harris," he said gently, inclining his head, "may I sit?" Aisha gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Of course." Raymond settled into the chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, studying her as if gauging her state of mind. He waited a beat before speaking, giving the moment the gravity it deserved. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "It's been a difficult flight." Aisha let out a soft, humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it." Raymond smiled faintly, though his eyes remained serious. "I know an apology doesn't erase what happened, but I hope the actions we've taken provide some sense of resolution." "They do," Aisha admitted. "I appreciate that you didn't just listen, you acted." "That's rare." "It shouldn't be," Raymond said firmly. "But I understand your point. Too often, people in my position offer apologies without substance. I've always believed accountability is what sets real leaders apart." Aisha nodded, her gaze steady. "It's not just about me, you know. What happened here, it's a symptom of something much bigger. If it hadn't been me, it could have been someone else, someone who might not have had the confidence to speak up." Raymond's expression softened. "You're absolutely right. And that's why this incident won't end with disciplinary action for 2 employees. I'll be addressing this with my entire team, training, policies, oversight. Everything will be scrutinized." The younger flight attendant returned, carefully placing a steaming cup of tea on Aisha's tray table. Her hands trembled slightly, but she managed a small, genuine smile before retreating. Aisha took the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, grounding her in the moment. Raymond leaned back slightly, his tone becoming more conversational. "If I may ask, Miss Harris, what gave you the strength to confront this so calmly? Many people would have reacted differently." Aisha considered his question for a moment, her eyes distant. "Experience," she said finally. "This isn't the first time I've faced this kind of treatment. But I've learned that anger alone doesn't bring change. It's important to channel it into something constructive, something that forces people to reflect." She paused, taking a sip of her tea before continuing. "And I've also learned that silence can be just as damaging as the act itself. If you don't call it out, you're giving it permission to continue." Raymond nodded, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. Wise words. And true. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the hum of the plane filling the space between them. Aisha felt herself beginning to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Raymond didn't press her further, respecting the quiet as much as she did. Eventually, he rose from his seat, offering her a small but sincere smile. "Thank you for your patience and for sharing your experience so candidly. It won't be forgotten." Aisha inclined her head. "Thank you for listening and for doing something about it." Raymond nodded and turned to leave but paused after a step. "One more thing, Miss Harris," he said, glancing back at her. "You have my personal number now. If you ever encounter anything like this again on one of my flights or anywhere else, don't hesitate to reach out." Aisha smiled faintly. "I hope I won't need to." "So do I," Raymond said with a chuckle. And with that, he walked back toward economy. The remainder of the flight passed uneventfully, the cabin finally settling into a rhythm of quiet comfort. Aisha finished her tea, closed her eyes, and let herself drift into a light doze. The events of the day finally receded into the background. When the plane began its descent, she felt a sense of clarity, not just about what had happened, but about what it meant. It wasn't just about her, it was about the countless others who might face the same silent battles, the same subtle injustices. And it was about making sure those battles didn't go unnoticed or unchallenged. As the plane touched down, the wheels skimming the runway with a soft rumble, Aisha opened her eyes and looked out at the city below. It felt like a fresh beginning, a step forward. The flight had ended, but the journey toward change was just beginning. The jet bridge was quiet as Aisha stepped off the plane, her carry-on slung over her shoulder. The hum of the airport filled the air, but she barely noticed it. Her mind was still processing the events of the flight. The calm she felt now wasn't triumphant, it was reflective, a quiet acknowledgement that battles like the one she'd faced were never truly over. Still, there was satisfaction in knowing this one had been fought and won with dignity. As she walked toward the baggage claim, Aisha's phone buzzed softly in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a message from her husband, Samuel. "Landed safe? Call me when you can. Raymond just called me, he's impressed with how you handled things. Proud of you, as always." Aisha allowed herself a small smile before tucking the phone away. She didn't feel like recounting the story just yet. There would be time for that later, once she was home and could fully unpack the emotional weight of the day. For now, she simply wanted to breathe, to exist in the quiet aftermath. Meanwhile, back at the airline's headquarters, Raymond Carter sat in his office, typing a detailed memo to his executive team. The subject line was simple but commanding: action plan for passenger equity and professionalism. In the email, he outlined the events of the flight, omitting names but not details. He demanded immediate changes, mandatory inclusivity training for all staff, anonymous reporting channels for passengers, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. He also added a note of personal reflection, emphasizing the importance of leading by example. Before sending the email, he paused, glancing at the small sticky note on his desk. On it was Aisha's name, underlined twice. He thought of her calm strength, her unflinching resolve, and how she had forced a reckoning without raising her voice. She had reminded him of why leadership wasn't just about running a company, it was about setting a standard. Back at the airport, Lisa and Jeff were escorted to a small office where their immediate dismissal paperwork was waiting. Neither spoke as the HR representative explained the terms of their termination. Lisa's hands shook as she signed the documents, her mind racing with disbelief and regret. Jeff, stoic as ever, said nothing, but his clenched jaw betrayed his frustration. As they left the office, Lisa glanced toward the bustling terminal, her gaze landing briefly on Aisha in the distance. A wave of something unnameable, shame, anger, perhaps both, washed over her. But she didn't approach. There was nothing left to say. Aisha stood at the curb, waiting for her car service. The sky above was beginning to darken, the early evening light casting long shadows across the pavement. A sleek black sedan pulled up, and the driver stepped out to open the door for her. "Miss Harris?" he asked, his voice polite. "Yes, thank you," she replied, stepping into the car. As the vehicle pulled away from the airport, Aisha leaned back against the seat, letting her eyes close briefly. She thought about the flight, about Lisa and Jeff, about Raymond Carter and his promise of change. She thought about the countless others who faced the same subtle aggressions she had endured and the importance of holding systems accountable, not just individuals. She wasn't naive. She knew there would always be another fight, another moment when she'd have to choose between silence and action. But she also knew she was ready. As the city skyline came into view, lit brightly against the deepening twilight, Aisha opened her eyes and smiled faintly to herself. Change wasn't quick or easy, but it started somewhere. And sometimes, it started at 35,000 feet. And so, justice was served, not with loud words, but with quiet strength and the unwavering belief that dignity matters. This story is a powerful reminder that standing up against prejudice, no matter how subtle, can lead to real change. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. And make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Adam Alpha, so you never miss more stories like this, stories that challenge, inspire, and spark important conversations. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.